Hi, I'm Nathan Fox. I'm chair of the MFA Visual Narrative Program at the School of Visual Arts, as well as co-creator and artist on the Weatherman series through Image Comics. And you are watching The Experience.
To be continued. 3 little words that hold the secret to the next great story. 3 words that will thrill you, confound you, give life to new possibilities. Every variation of To Be Continued is a promise. A promise of adventure. A promise of excitement. A promise of unseen wonders and unexplored worlds. A promise that every issue you read makes you a part of a never-ending journey. And behind every page there will be an unopened door waiting for you. This story to be continued at your local comic book shop today. Visit comicshoplocator.com today.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Dan Wickline Show. I'm your host, Durnan, owner of the Yawning Portal. Now, if you get that reference, today's show is definitely going to be for you. If you don't get that reference, you should probably stick around anyway, because we're going to talk about some fun stuff. What we are going to be looking into is Dungeons and Dragons. Now, again, ton of people are playing Dungeons and Dragons again. It's been around for, well, majority of my life. But I'm going to give you kind of an interesting, tell you about how I got into Dungeons and Dragons. But what I want to talk about today is the start of a new campaign. A lot of new campaigns are starting up right now. Critical Role, which is probably the most popular online game where you get to watch other people play, which has become pretty popular in itself, just the whole concept. But Critical Role is about to kick off their 3rd campaign tomorrow night. Me personally, as a dungeon master, I'm kicking off a new campaign with some people from the comic industry. We just had our first Zero episode, or Zero session. And if you don't know what that is, that's something I'm going to talk about here. And we're going to have our first game on November 7th. So I thought it would be fun to have a day where we just talk about how to prepare yourself for a new campaign, some of the great tools that are out there to help you. And also, if you're going to be DMing for the first time, how to get into that. Now, I'll be honest, I grew up a nerd, just absolutely 100%. I started reading comic books at 5, started collecting Star Wars at 7, because that's when they started collecting G.I. Joe when they came out, got Transformers, every comic book I could get. I got into Star Trek and Star Wars. I mean, just down the line, I was a nerdy guy. I went to my first comic convention at 11 and got to meet Walter Koenig, Carolyn Monroe, and Jack Kirby all the same weekend. So, like I said, lifelong nerd. That said, this actually surprised a lot of people. I didn't play Dungeons and Dragons until 5 years ago now. I think it was about 5 years ago. I got a text message from Matt Hawkins over at Top Cow, who I had just done some work for. And I was, he knew I was local. And I also went to a particular comic shop that he went to as well, not far from their offices. And he said, hey, I'm going to be putting together a D&D group. Would you like to play? And my first thought was, do I want to play with the publisher of an Image comic line? Yeah. And we had an interesting crew. We had Brian Edward Hill was part of it for like the first week, and then he got super busy and had to bail. But Ryan Cady was part of it. Dan Peterson from Skybound. We had a pretty cool crew. And again, this was all new to me. Now, everybody else had played, but this was a learning process for me. And I made the mistake of picking a bard. I decided to start with a bard, which is one of the more complicated characters to play. I do recommend, if you're a first-time player, you go for somebody that doesn't have magic spells of any kind, because then you learn all the other aspects of the game before you have to learn about spell management. So Berserker, Fighter, Rogue, even a Ranger. He's got a couple spells, but overall, those are pretty good safe bets to Monk's got spells. Fighter and Rogue are probably the best two to start off with. But that said, I started with a Bard. I got into the game and I made some mistakes. Absolutely. I didn't really understand how leveling up worked, and I didn't really, feel comfortable asking questions because everybody else had been playing for a long time. That's on me. I didn't feel comfortable, but I started using probably my favorite D&D tool, D&D Beyond. Now, I'm not going to make it. I'm not sponsored by D&D Beyond. I know of other game systems too. I've played on Roll20. I've played on what's the other one? Kyle, what's the other online one?
Roll20 is the one I know.
Roll20, but there's another one. It's like
I don't know the other one.
Fantasy Grounds. And I've counted those. And Roll20 is great for maps, but everything else I like D&D Beyond. For character sheets, for setting up something you can do on D&D Beyond, which is amazing, is they have a encounter encounter tool that allows you to put together all the creatures. You bring in your group, and you can run the encounter from there. And it's much easier to play. You have access to all the creatures that you're using. It keeps track of who's going in what order. Again, I'm a big fan of D&D Beyond. So if this ends up sounding like an ad for D&D Beyond, it's because I love the tool. They're not sponsoring this at all. I have a subscription with them. I have a bunch of books on there. But yeah, they're not sponsoring this. So this is just coming from my heart, not from their pocketbook. JD says the Yawning Portal show doesn't have the same touch. Yeah. Plus, I think Wizards of the Coast would actually sue me if I started calling it the Yawning Portal show. So when I created my Bard, I created it on D&D Beyond, and I made some mistakes. Like I said, I didn't. At a certain point, you're allowed to get spells from other places. I didn't know that. JD, we're talking Dungeons and Dragons and starting a new campaign today, whether you're as a player or as a dungeon master. So as I made my Bard, like I said, I made some mistakes, and it took me a while to figure it out. So my first big suggestion would be, don't be afraid to ask for help. And if you can't get it from your group, there are so many amazing resources on YouTube for, making suggestions on how to build the perfect whatever. You want to build a Bard. What type of Bard? You could go out there building the perfect Bard for D&D 5e, there's going to be about 17 different websites out there giving you their aspect or their perspective on it. What race is best? What what's the best achievements to do versus skill points. How best to use your skill points? Which ones should have the higher numbers? I mean, and what should you dump stats? All that stuff is out there. So there's so many resources out there that if you're a new player, you shouldn't be worried. It's all out there for you. Steve, you haven't played since the 70s. You should get back into it. It's 5e, which I know they're going to be doing a rework on, but 5e has really made it accessible to everybody. I believe the previous one, I think it was either 3 or 4, it was far more complicated than it needed to be. And they got smart, and they've made it much more user-friendly. And there's still, I mean, if you're an old school player, you don't have quite the ability to tweak it as much as you used to.
I needed to come and help with this. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So the D&D 4 was an entire mess. It was incredibly too complicated.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
They thought every player wanted to get into the weeds on everything. D&D 3.5 for most hardcore players is still the preferred play mechanic, still the preferred rule set. D&D 5 took the few good things about D&D 4, which spell casting got easier, things like this got easier, and mixed it with D&D 3.5, and they came out with 5e, which is what they're running now, and it's very good. The next generation, which I've seen some of the stuff on, will be a little more complicated and won't be to a lot of people's taste, but it will be really good for if you have a group that you've been playing with for 10 years and you really do want to get into the nitty gritty with your characters.
Will there finally be content for level 16 and up?
That is a good question. I don't know. I've not seen that. I've just seen some of the things like some of the way they're reworking mages. Spellcasters in general.
I'll say, yeah, nobody plays mages anymore.
Right. Spellcasters in general.
Yeah.
And I think you'll see the mage come back. So.
Okay.
All right. I'm here if you need me.
All right. See, that's the difference between Kyle and I. Kyle has been playing for a long time. I've only been playing for a few years. My experience is 5e. Now, I had an Advanced Dungeons and Dragons set when I was younger. Never had anyone to play with. So I read the books, I looked it over, loved the concept, never got to play. So when I got called, asked if I wanted to play, I'm like, hell yeah, let's see what we can do. Well, again, like I said, I made some mistakes. Now, if you're getting into a new campaign, and a lot of people there's constantly new campaigns starting on. I know probably in the last 2 years, I have been either DMing or invited to at least 4 or 5 different new campaigns. I've been playing. I have a rogue I'm playing. I have a Eldritch Knight I'm playing. I still have my bard, though that group hasn't played in a very long time. I have the new group I started. I have another group that I run, but I also run a paladin in that game. So I have a lot of characters that I keep going. But there's some things you need to do when you get to join a game. And part of it is to help your DM, and part of it is to learn properly. Now, I do recommend if you're a newer player, going out and looking at some of these guides out there. Now, they're not all perfect. They're all biased one way or another based on the person creating them. But you Google, like I said, best paladin build. And then they'll give you what are the best feats you can go with. What's the best way to set up your stats? And then You know, there's all that stuff you have to figure out. Well, these are good guides if you're a newer player. Now, as you get more experienced, or you want to get into the nitty gritty, there's so many different classifications within a class. You know, you want to be which college the bard is, or what type of fighter. Is he an Eldritch Knight? Is he a Cavalier? And every time a new book comes out, they seem to have more of these little subclasses you can get into. So those are a lot of fun. But again, it makes it more and more interesting, but it really allows you to get into the type of character you want to be. And that's the role-playing part of the game. There are some people who pretty much are just rogue murder hobos. It's all they ever play. They don't worry about their backstory. Kyle, yep, I knew he'd come on. Where all you care about are the fights and killing. And you know what? If that's how you want to play and your DM is good with that, go for it. I prefer a little more story, a little more interaction with the characters, but then I'm a writer. So when I DM, I also am trying to tell a story. Matt Hawkins was great about that. The game we were playing was very much a story. He created everything. From the cities, he had maps created by a cartographer for the game. And we had all these stories going on. And it was great. But you don't have to do all that as a DM either. So we're going to get into DMs. We'll probably spend the entire second half of the episode talking about DMing and what you can do and what you don't need to do. But let's stick with just the first round here. Now, you're going to want to find out from your DM how you're going to roll. You could roll for stats, and there'll be, maybe you roll 6 dice, you can't throw one out. Your DM will give you the rules. You could also use what's known as standard array, where you get a certain set of points and you assign them where you want. There's a couple different ways to do about it. Standard array is probably the most balanced way. That way everybody is starting off right around the same level. But if you want a more random, want a more user interface type of setup, you can do rolling where you roll for your points, and what you get is what you get. I've seen some variations on that.
One of my favorite mechanics is in a system that's no longer published. That was part of the original White Wolf series, which is a mix standard array and roll for. You get X number of points at standard array, but you can only assign them to 3 categories. And then you can roll for an additional 2.
Okay.
Because that's a 7 category game. So you have 7 different main traits that your character can have skills in. I really like that, and I've taken it into other games, and I've adapted it for D&D as well to do the mix, because then it lets you kind of, okay, my guy is not going to be completely nerfed in these categories. I'm going to assign some stuff here, but then I'm going to roll for some additional skills. And if I get lucky, maybe my rogue will also have good fighting, but I'm not going to risk him having 0 stealth.
Right.
So
now, one of the games I played in, the DM wanted us to be a little beefier when we started. So basically what he did was he had us roll and then throw out our lowest score and replace it with a 17.
That's one way to do it. And that's the great thing about being a DM, right? Is that you can make those rules.
Yeah. House rules are awesome. Or session, game rules are awesome. And no one's going to get on you for it. I mean, if you want to change things up, make it more fun, go for it. Yeah. And that again, that's part of being a DM.
Absolutely. I mean, I had another DM who we were playing in the Star Wars universe, who basically blacked out the entire Force category, forcing it so that no one had the Force, which makes it a way more interesting game if no one can wield a lightsaber or use the Force.
I've only played the Star Wars game once, and I think it's
Probably Force and Destiny, the newer one from Fantasy Flight.
no. This was more of a homebrew
Okay.
that got online that you can find online. It's part of somebody else's game system that they did an add-on.
We played a Star Wars game in the Savage Worlds mechanic, which is a D6 mechanic, which was
That's the
wildly interesting. Yep.
That's the one I've played. And that I thought was fascinating as hell. I had a lot of fun with that.
Yep.
But I did play a Jedi.
Yeah,
You know?
no, our game master made it so no one had the Force. We did have an astromech droid that, because of the way the NPC kept rolling, became known as the Droid of Death. Because it would insta-kill most times because of the way the rolls went. And it kept adding armor to itself and guns and weaponry. And it's supposed to be a repair droid. So, like I said, you said you've been playing about 5 years. I've been playing about 15.
Yeah.
I started playing right out of high school. I played in high school, but had a bad experience. And then started playing right out of high school. I mean, and I've dungeon mastered at Gen Con and Origins and all over the place. So this is a topic that's very, very close to my heart, as it were.
You can stay on if you want. You don't have to.
Well, I've been trying to get ready for Nick's show. But I'm here now. So
okay.
let's get into it. Can I tell you about the first time I ever had to roll a character?
Please.
I decided to play a rogue. Because as he said, there are certain character types that if you're a noob, please just play them.
Yeah.
Don't try and get fancy. Don't try and be a paladin or some sort of spellcaster
Or a bard.
Or a bard. Although if you play a bard right, you can do it right out of the book. But I wouldn't recommend it. But yeah, if it's the first time you're opening a D&D book, maybe stick to something that you've seen in a movie. If I usually say to people, if Mandy Patinkin has played it in a movie, then that's a character you can be. Or think about it like if they were going to be in The Princess Bride.
And there's a good chance that if there's a character in a movie that you think would be a cool D&D character, someone else has thought that too and has already put together what you need to do to make that character. I'm currently running a character. My Eldritch Knight is pretty much a Witcher.
Right. I oftentimes find myself, when other people are running the game, playing a character that's somewhere between Batman and Horatio from CSI. Just because that's just when somebody else is running the game, that's a character archetype that I can fall into without a ton of having to do additional research, do additional, that kind of thing. The one time it has failed me playing that character is I was playing a system called Godlike, which is all D10 based.
Okay.
And everybody has one superpower. And the pre-rolled character was a guy whose superpower was he could take his hockey stick and turn it into a sniper rifle with magic. I did not understand that, and Batman is not conducive to sniperism. So, that's the only time that character archetype has failed me. But it's when you're a noob, play those characters, play those types. And so I was playing essentially George from The Grapes of Wrath.
Okay.
And my friend was playing Lenny.
Mm-hmm.
And I was a paladin. And you're right, and he was a half-orc.
Okay.
It was the most awkward game I've ever played. And because neither of us knew what we were doing, really, we had spec'd these characters entirely wrong for the situations they were going to find themselves in because we hadn't paid attention in our Zero campaign. Yet the thing about the Zero campaign, guys, is if you're a new player and you show up and you have a DM like Dan who has everything planned out, take notes, write as many notes as you can, and then use that to figure out what your character is.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't pay attention to that, you're going to wind up with a character who is great in combat, walking into a tavern and trying to pick up a wench and he has no social skills. So just pay attention to those things. The other thing I would say is this. If you are uncomfortable with the role playing, becoming the character, make your character you and just react how you would react, especially in your first campaigns. My first time out, I didn't know the difference between a video game RPG and a tabletop RPG. And I played them as such, and my character sucked. It was bad. Once I learned that difference, I was able to be much more effective as a teammate. Yeah. So make that character you and react how you would react, because if nothing else, you know your instincts.
But when you're filling out the character, there's a lot of stuff like background questions that you get asked. And it's very important you actually take the time to fill those out, because your DM is likely to add things to the game based on your background. If you say, oh, well, there's somebody that I wronged, that, you know, I have, what wealth I have, I got because I wronged somebody. That person may pop up, you know, or I lost a sister. Well, you may find the killer, you know. That gives your DM more tools to play with to help personalize the story, but it also gives you more to work with as your character.
Yep.
You know, I have a rogue I created recently, and he's a halfling, but I didn't want to play as a halfling. But I was limited to the choices. So what I did was I made him a tabaxi who was cursed into the form of a halfling. So I do all these traits as the character like a cat person, even though he's a halfling. You know, he climbs up trees, he sleeps in trees, and he's got little climbing gear that is always on his boots and stuff so that he can do this. And it's little things I worked out with the DM. And eventually he's going to break the curse.
Right.
But, you know.
And that's exactly it. So once you answer those questions, right, take that information, have that written down for yourself too. Make a photocopy, do whatever you got to do. But I always tell people, write a page and a half prose story of your character. How did they get to where the party is at? Oh, you're in a tavern in the woods outside of. So you're in the yawning portal.
Mm-hmm.
Great. How did your character come to be there? What are the things that have happened in their lives that have brought them there? Oh, they were their parents died and they were sold to a circus, and then they broke out from this. You know, whatever you want that to be, that builds out that character. The dungeon master doesn't need to know all that. That's stuff that your character could be repressing. That's stuff that your character could be carrying with them. But it informs every decision that you make. And so then your dungeon master knows the little things that you've given them. So when they bring them up or insert them into the game, you can bring all of this additional baggage and storytelling to your character and make it a more full experience for the rest of the party.
Exactly.
I played in a different Star Wars campaign. We played a lot of Star Wars back in the day. I played a Wookiee who spoke Basic. So a Wookiee who speaks Basic is going to be ostracized from the Wookiee community. And so he was a Wookiee who had been sold as a sideshow attraction by his own people and betrayed and all of these kind of things. And he winds up breaking out of this sideshow and going to work for the Hutt Collective. This is what my dungeon master knows. What my dungeon master doesn't know is that I'm also a Wookiee that is smaller than average Wookiee size, that's hair is an odd color, whose parents were ostracized from the community. Like all of this background that I'm able to bring to the character when they, oh, now we're going to battle the Hutts. Got it. All of this stuff comes flooding back to my character, and my character goes from maybe a lawful good alignment to a chaotic neutral because of his emotional state. Now all of a sudden we're playing a game.
Yeah. Interesting. I didn't think canonically a Wookiee had the ability to verbalize words or.
They do not. But it was the only way that the DM could agree to make it work. Because if the whole party couldn't communicate with the Wookiee, how could the Wookiee be a useful part of the party?
Yeah, but then you could have spent the whole thing just growling, which would have been awesome.
That was the other reason, is I didn't want to fry my voice.
That's another reason not to do the Batman voice for your character.
Right.
Doing voices as your character is a lot of fun. But the two things you need to do is, one, make it consistent, and two, make it something you can do on a regular basis. When I play my halfling, I know his voice is down here, so I can always do this voice pretty easily because I know exactly where it is in my mouth. So I can do that voice, and I can even sing. We had a bar scene where we sang Toss a Coin to Your Witcher, and I sang along with our bard. But you can do that if that's a voice you can do, or in a game I was DMing in Waterdeep, there's basically a head shop, and there's this little gnome that runs the head shop. Well, I could have done another what sounds like a gnome voice, but instead I went with the head shop idea, and I went full Matthew McConaughey. Hey, come on in.
I would have gone Tommy Chong.
Okay, another good choice.
Right. Because that's a voice I can do anytime, man. Like, you just slip into it. And right. One of my examples of this, and I recommend this, is accents rather than full voices.
Yeah.
Do your own voice in an accent.
When I do Durnan, I do a Sean Connery Scottish accent. Welcome to the yawning portal. Can I get you a beer?
Right. I run a game every year at Gen Con. It's the search for Nikola Tesla in Siberia when he was trying to harness the Northern Lights for power. Not something that ever happened, but it's a story we tell. And you come across this Russian army outpost, and there's one guy there who's been by himself for a very long time. And you come upon him, and he just goes, "Do you have any Yadka? I need Yadka. I need to get the pump on with the Yadka." And he's Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Mm-hmm.
Because at some point, inevitably, in every campaign, he goes, "Come with me if you want to live." It's...
Of course he does.
Well, because inevitably a Yeti comes, and it's a whole thing. But, he says that thing, and so I have to make this character Arnold Schwarzenegger. I've done other characters in Africa where they are entirely... the characters are totally the bad guys from Lethal Weapon 2. Like,
Yeah.
So find an accent that you can live in.
Yeah, or a voice. I mean, if you can't do a voice, don't worry about it. But it does make it something different, and it's easier to get into character. Because, I mean, even if you decide to do the Batman voice and you're like, "I'm going to kill you now." Now, that's going to destroy your voice after a little while, but you get into that character, and you know it when you're there. So,
another recommendation in that is just to find a vocal pattern. Something that's not, if you can't do a voice, you can't do an accent, you can't do any of those things. Think about how Yoda talks. Do or do not, there is no try. That was Kermit the Frog, but it's the way Yoda speaks, or I don't know, like just whatever you can do that gives your character a vocal tick, because you can't generally do those things without involving your entire body.
Right.
Leaving out conjunctions.
And if you're new at this, one of the things that'll help you get into a voice is a key phrase, something you can say that in your head sounds like exactly the voice, or record yourself on your phone on a memo thing so you can play it back. A lot of impersonators do that. That's why you hear a lot of them when they do Ronald Reagan. It's, "Well, Nancy and I, we really believe that." Well is the key phrase.
Mm-hmm.
Or with Bill Clinton, it's, "I feel your pain," and then you just talk like this. You can do an entire game like you're Bill Clinton. The idea being that the key phrase will get you into the character. Even if you don't say it out loud, it'll get your mouth. Part of accents are where you say them.
Mm-hmm.
Are they nasal? Are they more guttural? Where are they, from the back of your throat, from the top of your mouth?
But once you have your character's voice in your mouth, now you can find your character's posture. And this is going to sound like I'm saying 2 + 2 = a slice of bread. But the fact of the matter is that if you're playing a rogue and you're sitting back from the table like this, you're not playing a rogue. You've got to be in. You've got to be like this. You've got to be elbow on the table, hand on your fist like this. You've got to be in. You have to find your character's posture. And that's not to say that you won't sit like this while stuff that doesn't involve you is happening. But when you become inhabitants in your character, every part of you. So I'm playing a character right now where I won't sit in the chair correctly. I turn the chair so the side of the chair is here, and I lean. Because the character is kind of a swashbuckly gunslinger guy. We're in an old Western setting.
Mm-hmm.
And so my character is always, well, I mean, if I got to shoot him, I guess I'm going to shoot him.
Mm-hmm.
But he never moves. He never speaks quickly. There's no rush. Everything is slow. And they're like, he points his gun at you. Well, I reckon I'm going to blow his brains out. Diabetes. I'm Wilford Brimley. But you find your characters, you find the voice, you get the voice in your mouth, then you find the pose, you find the stance, the posture.
Mm-hmm.
And then that starts to factor into how you play as the character.
Yeah. And remember, this is supposed to be fun. And when you can go away and be something completely different, you can put away a lot of the outside problems in the world, and you just focus on being this character for 3, 4, 5 hours, whatever your session length is. And it's fun. I mean, that's the key, is you should be having fun. So create the character, make your backstory, give it as much depth as you feel comfortable with, and find the way you want to play it. The more it's not like you, the more you'll probably have fun, because you're stepping out of yourself. You're no longer Dan doing these things that you would never do. You're Davrin North, the bard, And every once in a while during a game, if I was having a hard, I'd bring my guitar with me,
Mm-hmm.
Or I have a tin whistle. I'd bring that just so I'd have a musical instrument. I'd never play it during the game, but I'd have it to kind of get into the character.
Yep.
That type of thing.
I mean, that's 100% true. It's find the little, that was the last tip I was going to give, is find the things, find the fidgets that help you embody your character. The character I'm playing right now in the Western game, I've constantly got a pen or a pencil, it's just something like a piece of hay coming out of his mouth. Like he's, constantly have something like that. Or the other thing I love to do is I have one of those fidget cubes, and one of the things on it are these sort of hexagonal wheels you can roll. And when I'm about to go into a gunfight, I'll spin them, because it feels in my brain, it unlocks that spinning the chamber on a Colt Peacemaker, on a revolver. And it's the little fidgety things that make your character. Do not be the guy who sits there and is constantly rolling his die.
Ooh, yeah,
don't be that guy. I get that sometimes it helps you stay focused. Sometimes it helps you don't do it. Find a different fidget that is not going to distract from the game or potentially cause problems for your dungeon master, because you've got an errant fidget.
Yeah. If your character is a drinker and you get
a drink.
If you get yourself a flask, even if it's water or iced tea, and just kind of sip from it occasionally to keep in character. But other things you should do. Now, I think at this point we're going to stick with as a player, and we'll do DMing tomorrow.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah. So when you're making a character and you're picking your abilities, there are just a ton of different abilities you can pick. And it's besides how you're going to fit in with the group, it's also going to be towards your character. You know, if you're playing a ranger, you can be a ranger who sits back and snipers it with a bow and arrow, or you could be a ranger who, you know, has a lot of animal control. You could be a ranger that likes to get up there and, you know, dual wield swords and get in there and fight up close. It's the flavor of play, and your abilities should also lead into your character. You know, if you're playing a cleric, you could be a battle cleric. You could be a death. There's a death one that, you know, you're doing as much damage and you know, toll for the dead and all that stuff. Or you could be a cleric who focuses on healing. You know, you could be a healer. You know, bard. With a bard, you could be one that gets in there and fights up close. You could be more of a support character where you're doing small heals and enhancement spells, so to buff other people. You know, it really comes down to what flavor of play you want. You know, do you want to be the tank? Do you want to be the caster? Do you want to be the healer? Do you want to be the rogue? There's all these different flavors of play, and think about that when you're creating your character and even when you're picking your class. You know, I mean, say you want to make a Green Arrow character. You want to be like Green Arrow. Well, it would seem like a ranger would be the perfect fit, but there are other characters who use archery. There are fighters who use archery. There are rogues who use archery. So it could be, depending on how you want to play it, another route to go to that. So talking to other people, looking at things up, that's always a good way to go.
Yeah. I can't stand playing magic users personally. And the reason being is that I feel so often like when I do that, I'm forced into using magic.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is that especially in D&D 5e, they've moved away from that traditional stereotype that was true in the past. It used to be if you were a sorcerer, you could only do sorcery. Period.
Yeah.
That's not necessarily true anymore. So for me, creating a character now has become more about what are the fringe things these classes can contain. So if I'm a fighter, oh, you mean to tell me I'm a fighter who can also be a ranged archer or a maybe someone who has a sling or something that gives me a little bit of a ranged weaponry.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to be a fighter like I used to be where I have a bludgeon and that's my only weapon. Because swords were rogues, like not swords were a different class.
Yeah.
You have some. They've expanded these character archetypes enough, really, to be playable no matter what you want to do. In terms of your constitution, as it were, your player constitution. I will always recommend to first-time players, if you don't know what to do, be a barbarian.
Yeah.
And expand from there. Barbarian is the simplest class to play. In terms of its fringes aren't that wide. It's a pretty narrow archetype. And then expand from there by your race and your subclass and your subspecies and all these other things you can do to give the character more depth. I was just looking at some new stuff that was sent to me by a friend of mine who runs D&D Adventures. And I think my next character will probably be my first ever ranger.
There you Now, this new group I've just put together, 5e has kind of changed it where you could probably get away without having a dedicated healer because so many people. But I looked at the group makeup and I'm like, you guys don't have enough guys that can do spells and will take that. You're going to need a dedicated healer. And there wasn't a volunteer. So as the DM, I decided I'm just going to go ahead and roll an NPC that'll be with them as a healer. But I'm still going to make the character fun, you know. I decided if I'm going to make a cleric, I looked up all the different races that are good at cleric. And the one that jumped out at me as something different was a furbolg, which are these like 7 to 8 foot tall creatures that are very nature, you know, in love with nature type of thing. And I thought, okay, I'm going to make a cleric furbolg. So yeah, I have a 7'8" giant cleric in chainmail running around. But when you make a cleric, then you've got to decide, okay, what's his god going to be? What's his symbol? Who's he following? And you have that same decision when you make a paladin. Well, I decided I'm going to go with nature. I'm going to stick with nature here. And I was trying to think of a god that seems like nature. Now, I could have went, you know, the different pantheons, they all have different things. But I decided to go really different. And I decided to make my furbolg worship Ratatoskr. Norse pantheon, the giant squirrel that guards the Yggdrasil. So he's going to have a shield with a symbol of Ratatoskr on it, and that's going to be his holy symbol. That way he doesn't have to put his shield down to cast.
He's going to be obsessed with Squirrel Girl.
He's going to what? Oh,
be obsessed with Squirrel Girl? No.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. And as I'm digging more into this character, I'm like, okay, I had to come up with a name, so I looked up Norse names or names from that area, and I chose Asger, which I thought was a pretty good name. So we got Asger the cleric, and you know. But as I'm going into this, I'm like, okay, now I need to come up with how he's going to sound. Now, I tend to be imprinted on by these shows I watch. When I said when I was telling Kyle earlier, when I do Volo, I used to watch this one group that did Tomb of Annihilation. Volo's a character in it. The DM on that show, he did a voice. This was a Volo, you know. So I sell in my book. You're gonna love it. So when I do Volo, that's the voice because that's kind of imprinted in my head now. Well, when I sat down to create Asger, and I'm thinking, what furbolgs have I heard? Critical Role, Pumat Soul, Matt Mercer's character, and he talks like this. He's kind of a little bit of a Yotterhay from up in Wisconsin there. He's got that voice, and he's very so this is going to be the cleric's voice, you know?
Right. And something as a player, if your cleric, your healer is an NPC, you have to play different.
Yes.
Your healer is an NPC. If your healer dies, you're SOL. You have to make every move in your game, especially in a combat scenario, about protecting your cleric, protecting your healer. Mm-hmm. If you're going to attack someone, you need to make sure that the fallout from that attack is not going to be that they take out your healer. So you have to think about the entirety of the results of your move if you don't have a healer in your party. So always, always, always peer pressure one of your friends into playing a healer. Make sure that it's not my friend Chris, though. My friend Chris, once while playing our healer, rolled 3 nat 1 in one session and turned us all into, how do I put this, otherworldly hell beasts. Total party kill.
Nice.
That was not a good time. So if you do have a friend who plays the healer, make sure they can actually heal you.
Now, something else I'm going to recommend if you're a new player is keep an eye on talk to the DM to find out what their plan is. Because if you're going to jump into a session that's going to be years, Tomb of Annihilation, that's a very long campaign, stuff like that. There are some newer books out, like Candlekeep Mysteries, Ghost of Saltmarsh, that are broken into smaller stories. And the advantage of that is you could complete the story, and then at the end you could kind of assess, like, wow, I really hate playing a rogue. Can I swap characters at this point? And then they could come up with a story. It's harder to do during the middle of a campaign. So if you're new, try to get into a shorter campaign to get your feet wet. Even better if you could get into like a one-off. I just saw on the D&D Beyond site, which blew my mind, they tell you how to play Ravenloft in one session, which sounds fantastic to me.
Yeah.
Or I have my own. I've only written one adventure on my own. I tend to borrow. I'll take a adventure and then morph it into what I want. But I have one specific adventure that I've created, and I've ran it once, and I want to run it again. If we ever get around to doing an actual live game for the experience, I might suggest this one. But it's a fun, quick adventure. It's a one-shot. And so the more one-shots you do, the more you can get in. And then your character background stuff isn't as important, but you can learn the fundamentals, learn the mechanics. Those are great to jump in on. So if you can get into any one-shots, it's a great way to start. Even if they're a pre-rolled character.
Because one of the things I would recommend to a newbie, go to your local game shop and say, hey, do you have D&D Adventure League? Do you have a newbies night? Do you have an opportunity once a month or whatever it is for people who have never played to come in and run a one shot? You're in it for 4 hours and you're done. That's a great way to do it. And a lot of times it plugs you in with other new players or other people who have been removed from playing for a while. And I can't tell you how many groups I've found because I've DM'd a one shot for a local gaming store. And it's, hey, if any of you are interested in playing, we're starting a new session of this game next month. Here's my email. Get at me. Or how many friends I've made who I play with to this day because we were in the same pickup game. There weren't enough people for a one-shot party or something like that. We just need some people, and we were there anyway doing something else. Sure, I'll sit in. That's a great way to do it. To speak to something Dan said earlier about find out where your DM is going. As a DM, I will never tell you. Just won't do it. Part of that is because I don't always know.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that is because that takes away some of the random act that is role-playing.
When I say that, I don't mean story-wise. I mean there is certain information a DM can tell you in the beginning.
Right.
Like setting, like this is going to be a dungeon crawl.
Right. So this is going to take 6 sessions. Yeah.
Fighting, constitution, that's going to be important. No, this is more of a mystery thing. So now you want your intuition to be higher. You want your inspection to be higher, those kind of things. So you can get that information from the DM, but also the length and breadth of the event of the thing. He's not going to tell you, well, we're going to have a dragon at the end of this one, and I'm going to take us over into this other thing.
Right. No, and that's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm saying is the things I won't tell you are often the things that kind of go into length. because I don't know. It's going to depend on the decisions you make in the first 10 minutes of the game, whether or not we're adding sessions on to the end.
Yeah.
It's going to depend on how long do you spend talking to that random woman in town who knows nothing, but you feel like she knows everything. And now we've spent a half a session on it. That sort of stuff. I am a big proponent of, if you find yourself playing a character you find untenable, tell the game master. They could do one of two things. They can start to edit what they're thinking and what they're doing to make that character more playable for you, or they can kill you. And then you can roll a new character and rejoin at the next jumping on point.
Or if you have someone to help you,
Mm-hmm.
you can mix class.
Yeah.
You can start with the wizard and go, I'm so tired of dying constantly, and start taking some levels of fighter so you can start wearing armor and these other things.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, there are a lot of options if you communicate with your dungeon master. The simple thing is talk to your dungeon master.
Yes.
Like the end of the page, it being a good D&D player, being a good tabletop RPG player, doesn't matter what you're playing, D&D, Pathfinder, Clockwork Dominion, which is a game I worked on, White Wolf, 221
Marvel
Baker,
Superheroes.
Marvel Superheroes. There's so many great tabletop RPGs out there that I've played, that the way you become good at them is by talking to the dungeon master. And if you're in the middle of a game and you have a question and you don't want to ask in front of everybody, pull them to the side. A good dungeon master will walk with you across the room and whisper. There's a lot, have that communication, because that will grow your character and make you a better player, even if you find yourself in a situation that isn't exactly what you'd hoped it would be.
Yeah. So hopefully this will give you some place to start. Like I said, I do recommend D&D Beyond. It's a great tool. I also recommend, as a player, watching some of these online games. Going to YouTube. D&D's YouTube site has some great ones. Critical Role is a great one. But that's as a player. What I also want to warn you is, as a DM, if you're looking to become a DM, don't assume just because Matt Mercer is doing all that stuff that you have to do all that too.
Right.
There are levels of, he's a very creative person. He's a voice actor. He's got all that stuff he can do. You don't feel that you have to do that. So don't be intimidated by it if you're looking to be a DM, but it's still good to watch, to see what they do, to see what the players do. And it gets you more into the game. You can see different players, how they play, different classes, different races. It's all a lot of fun. And the bottom line is, this is a game. Have fun with it.
Right. Like with anything else you do, the more time you spend on it, the more time you spend doing it, the better you'll get.
Yep.
Same for your dungeon master. If you're working with a new dungeon master, just bear with them. Don't ruin their game. Yep. Just on the face of it. So
yep.
I guess we'll talk about GMing tomorrow, huh, Dan?
Yep. You going to come back?
Yeah, I'll be here.
Okay. Yeah, we will talk about DMing tomorrow. For now, stick around for Rex and the Not Nicks as Dynamite Comics and Collectibles comes up. And I saw one of the things they have is a Gunslinger #1 signed by Todd McFarlane. That, one of 1,190 that were made, or 1,191. So if that's something that interests you, definitely stick around for it. And some other great books. They have the Phoenix Saga stuff. It's an amazing lineup. So definitely stick around for that. We'll be back tomorrow. See you then. Good night, everybody.